Okay, now all you have to do now is whip finish.
All right, let's get that in place there. Okay, that will do that. Hi there, my name is Al Beatty. Joining me today are my friends Paul and Char Stimson, and of course my wife Gretchen. We're going to be tying some original Gary LaFontaine flies. Flies that some have been published and some have not been published. Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this video came about in your discussions with Gary?
Thanks, Al. At a recent fly tying conclave, I was tying a beadhead Marabou worm for Gary. And Al and I were talking about that fly and realized that there are lots of flies that Gary has never put on video. And so we were talking about doing a video and putting all of his flies on video so we could show the public how to tie Gary's flies.
As I recall, Paul, when you were tying that worm, we got to talking about doing this video and getting Gary's permission, of course, to do the video. And we talked at length about the different patterns, some that Gary wanted to have done specifically.
That's right, Al. When I talked to Gary about doing this video, he really wanted us to do the Aft Sparkle and also the Beadhead Twist Nymph to show that magic dubbing technique that he does. In addition to those two flies, we want to show the Beadhead Marabou Worm, the new super fly, and there's so many other patterns we won't be able to get them all on the video. What we did do, though, in order to get as many as we possibly could, we brought along some help.
The help that Paul brought is our two wives, both very good fly tyers in their own right. It's Gretchen Beatty and Char Stimson. This is a workshop in which we're all going to be learning. Paul's sharing with us the various things that he's learned from Gary. So we'll be working together as we go through these flies. For many of us, in these patterns are going to be the first time that we tie them, when we tie them actually on screen. It's going to be a lot of fun, though, as we share tips, tricks, and techniques that originally came from Gary LaFontaine. So let's get started.
Our first fly is going to be a Beadhead Twist Nymph. In this fly, we're going to combine the magical properties of peacock with the magic of the Antron yarn. And we're going to make a dynamite little dubbing pattern. I've already put a bead on my hook, and I'm putting my hook in the vise. Okay, I'm going to start my base wrap right behind the bead and cover the shank.
Oh, I see you're one of the fly tyers that likes to trim your thread. Do you think that's a good way to do it, Paul?
Yeah, it probably adds one step, but it becomes a habit. Next step for me is to tie in a sparse marabou tail. I want that to be about 3/4 the length of the shank. I'll pre-trim and tie that in right at the back of the fly. Okay, the next thing I want to do is put some dubbing wax on the thread. Make sure that's nice and sticky. And then I'll take my Antron dubbing and touch dub that thread and make sure I get plenty of Antron on there. I'll tie in some peacock right on top of the hook shank, and then I'll make a dubbing loop. After running my thread to the front of the hook, now I'll pull the peacock down into the dubbing loop and connect it with this little electrical clip. Then it's a matter of twisting the peacock and the Antron together to form the body material.
Oh, I see. By doing this, you don't have to actually dub the dubbing onto the thread. It kind of sticks there with the dubbing wax itself, huh?
Right. The wax keeps it on there really well until I can get that all twisted up together.
Sure.
Okay? After that's completed, now I wrap the body. And you can see what that antron and the peacock are doing. They're combining to make a great body of material. When this gets wet, the antron will pull air bubbles from the water. The peacock, with the iridescence of the peacock, attracts the fish. And I got a great little nymph pattern. The last thing I do before I whip finish, I'm going to touch dub with some olive antron to form a little collar right behind the bead.
Okay, I noticed you just kind of just put that on the thread as well, huh?
Right. Okay, now all I have to do is whip finish, and this fly is complete.
That's the whole thing?
That's it.
Wow.
The technique for tying the body on this little nymph is called double magic. That's what Gary calls it, and I'm sure it'll be magic for you when you fish it. The next pattern, I'm going to put just a plain peacock body on, but I have to admit, when Gary asked me to tie this fly on video, I was a little nervous. This is a difficult fly to put a clear antron hackle on the fly. In practicing for this, all of a sudden I had a brainstorm and come up with a new method of tying it, and I'd like to show you that method. I'm going to put the hook in the vise. Okay, I'm going to take the thread and start my base wrap right in the back, right above the barb. Okay, after getting rid of that, first thing I'm going to do is put on a tail, and I'm going to use spade hackle, and it's going to be white. There's two different methods of putting this tail on. I can put it on and split it, or I can put it on and splay it. I want the tail to be about the length of the shank, so I'll tie it on right at the back. And now to splay this, I'm going to take a wrap of thread right underneath the tail and pull. And that splays it out so it sets on the water. Got one bad fiber right there, and I'll just cut it right out. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is put some antron. This material is called clear antron. It's antron with absolutely no color filaments in it at all. This is what Gary uses for the back hackle of this next fly. Now the way Gary ties it is he puts it in a dubbing loop and spins it around the hook. To me, that was difficult to do, so I'm going to try a different method. I'm going to measure it so it's hackle length, which is 1.5 gaps for a dry fly. I'll mark that and double the length on it, so I've got 2.5 gaps. I'm going to cut it off right at that point.
I see you're doubling your pieces to come up with twice as much. Is that
right?
What?
Just in order to get enough hackle, because what I'm going to do with it is completely encircle the hook. In order to do that, though, I'll lay it right in my tie-in point and spread it around the hook. Now, when I bring my fly tying thread up, and I make 2 good hard turns right in the middle of that antron. This gives me a time right now to spread that antron so it encircles 360 degrees of the hook. What I'm going to do is pull it back so it stands out at a right angle and wrap in front. And then I stand it up in the back at a right angle, bring the thread around, and stand it up in the back.
So you're putting turns both back and front of the hackle to force it to stand up.
Right. This way, it gives me a clear antron hackle that completely encircles the hook. And
right. Do you have to trim any of it up? No, you trimmed it
Yep.
when you put all the pieces together, didn't you?
There are a few offending hairs in there that I'll trim down just to make it look good, but for the most part, that's exactly what we want. 360 degrees of the shank of the hook with antron sticking out from it. The next step is going to be peacock. Okay, I'll bring my thread up to the front to tie in the peacock. Okay, I'm going to take my peacock fibers this way. I like to cut the tips off, and that way it makes it a little bit stronger when I tie it in. And I'll wrap back over the peacock this way, and then I'll bring it down and form another dubbing loop, except this time I'm going to cut part of the loop off. I want one strand to wrap up with the peacock. What I have is peacock fibers there with one strand of thread, and I attach my electrical clip and then twist up the body. Okay. From that point, I'll just wind the peacock forward and tie off in the front. Clip away the excess, and the last material that goes on here is a regular chicken hackle right in the front. I'll tie it on right behind the eye and get 2 or 3 good turns of hackle in the front to help float this fly. I'll tie that off and whip finish.
When you fish this fly, Paul, does the back hackle kind of sweep back and kind of an arch around the hook, or does it stay out like that?
Yep, actually it does. The fly will collapse on that back hackle a little bit. When that back hackle gets wet, what it really does is collects air bubbles from the water and will completely obscure the hook. So a real selective fish will take this fly without any problems. This next fly is called the Lady Heather. This is a fly that Gary named after his daughter, and he uses this fly to fish on those dreary days when it's really rainy and lots of cloud cover. The tail of this fly is going to be from spade hackle. I've got some done spade hackle here, and I'll pull off some fibers, make them about the length of the shank, and tie it in. Got a couple of wild ones there. Okay, right at the very back of the fly, I'm going to dub in some muskrat. This muskrat fur is going to be in a ball shape, and it's going to depict an egg sac for this fly.
So you're not exactly doing the body, Paul. What you're doing is just adding the egg sac for the before you put the body on.
Right. Yep. I just put a little dubbing ball in the back, and then the next material that I put on is going to be another dubbing. This one's going to be a cream dubbing, and this will imitate the body of the fly.
And is that also muskrat dubbing, Paul?
No, it's not. This is a synthetic dubbing. It has a little sparkle to the body.
Okay. And how far does that go forward?
This will go right up to about the 2/3 or 4/5 mark of the fly.
Oh, okay.
I also want this body to be slender. I don't want it to be as thick as the egg sac. I want a bit of a taper, and that should be good right there. Get a little too much, we'll pull off the excess. Okay, the next thing I want to do is put in some calf tail. I've got a calf tail here. I'm going to trim some calf off and stack it up nice and neat in the stacker.
And I assume this is going to be a Trude style wing, Paul?
Right, down wing, tied in right over the back, and I want it to extend about halfway past, to about halfway up on the tail.
Oh, okay. All
okay?
right. Sure.
I like to pre-trim, and I'll tie it in right in front of the body. Okay, here's a little trick that Gary had taught me earlier on how to make sure that that down wing stays in. Sometimes I have a problem with that pulling out on me. I'm going to bring the thread up. I'm not going to go around the hook shank. I'll pull the wing up and make a turn around the wing and then come back around the front of it. And then when I force down with my thumb, I can spread that wing out a little bit. But doing that really puts it in there really good and solid. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do on the fly is put in 2 hackles. I'm going to put in one dun hackle and one grizzly hackle. I'm going to make sure that I've got a bare stem to tie in on. And I like to tie in my hackles at the same time, but I'll wrap them one at a time. I'll tie them in on the side, making sure they're good and solid.
Do you or Gary have any preference as to which way the hackle is facing?
Yeah, actually Gary likes it facing with the dull side facing forward, and I like it with the dull side facing back. But since this is Gary's fly, we're going to tie it his way.
Okay, sure, gotcha.
Okay, I'll wrap this up, make sure I don't crowd the eye, and tie it off. Okay, bring in the next hackle. Notice I don't cut the stub off there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, if I bump that thread and it loosens, then I unwrap the hackle. If I've cut the stub off, I've lost one wrap of hackle.
Sure you have. That's
Okay,
a good idea.
Now I'll take the next hackle and wrap right through the first hackle. Since the stems of this hackle are so thin, I can do that without mashing down too many of the barbs. This grizzly hackle gives this fly a little bit of a buzz effect. Okay, and then I can trim both off at the same time. And then I come in with my whip finisher and form the head of the fly.
Boy, that's a hot looking fly. I'd never have seen a dun grizzly mixed hackle before.
Yeah, it gives a great imitation of a buzzing insect, but it also, because of these drab colors, that works really well on a dark day when it's really raining and drab and overcast. This is a great fly.
Here, I'll get that hook in the vise. I think it was really neat what Paul did on that last fly, where he took the loop around underneath the Trude style wing to kind of hold it up. One of the things it will do, besides anchoring the wing into place, it will keep that hair from sneaking down around the body and covering up that color as well. Now the next couple of flies that I'm going to tie for you are Hairwing versions that Gary has developed. The first one, and I'm going to say it real slowly and then only once, because I stumble on the word every time, but it's called the duck butt dun. From this point on, I'm going to refer to it as the dun. So I managed to get over that one. The one after that will be the werewolf, and I think you'll find that one interesting as well. But first, let's get into the dun. I'll start by attaching my thread about 1/4 behind the eye of the hook and wrapping towards the bend. Okay, I get right to the back end of that fly, and I'm going to come back about halfway into the middle of the body area. It's just going to be kind of a division area between the space that I use for the tail and the space that I use for the wings. Now this is a couple of CDC feathers, thus the word duck butt. I've got 2 of them laid on top, and I'll just pull all the fibers off of one side. Notice how they're all uneven here. We want them that way. That's the way the fly is supposed to be. So I'll pull that off, set the feathers aside for my next fly, if that's what I happen to tie. And I want you to note the staggered effect that you get from that. I'm measuring for a general overall length of equal to the hook shank. And I'll just trim off some excess here so that I can tie that on right at the middle of what I call the body area, where I left my thread hanging. Kind of right at the hook point, I guess you could say, of over the hook shank. Anyway, there's the tail. It extends very raggedly to the to the back end. This particular fly, though I'm tying it in a size 8 for you to easily see what's going on, in reality is probably much more effective in sizes 12 through about 20. Now we're going to get some hair out here to stack. Let me make a selection here. I'll move it down away from the camera for a moment, but I want to show you something. I'll set that aside. Notice how this has kind of a natural curve to it. Lots of hair has that. Unfortunately, it is a nemesis for many fly tyers, but you can correct that by taking your thumb and your fingers and just stroking that and straightening it. See, I'm just kind of working on that and straightening things out. It makes things a lot easier to work with after I've stacked them. I'll just slide that into my stacker. Okay, we'll get that in there and stack it and prepare to tie on our wing. Now, notice that I've tilted my stacker to the left. That's so the tips of my hair are pointing to the left, which is the right. That's the direction that I need to use them. If I was going to tie a tail, I would go the other direction with them. And I dropped the hair in the process of showing you this, but that's quite all right. We'll just put it back in the stacker and do it over. This would be what happens when you go to the left. I'm going to be tying a wing. We'll go to the right instead. Pull this out. We're going to measure it for length. And the length is equal to the length of the hook shank. We'll just set it into position and bind it in place and then tighten up. Really crank in there on these next couple of turns. Now, trimming off the hair in the process, the method that you use to do that is quite important. And I'm going to lay my scissors flat from the opposite side of the vise, not from this side, opposite side, and get a nice tapered cut that way. It'll make a lot nicer shaped body in the long run. There we go. And then we'll just get that base wrap. Now, I'm going to leave my thread hanging right there. That's called the pull point. The pull point is to get this material all up on top of the hook and take a loop around it and come back to the center. Coming from the pull point like that, you don't have one of these situations where part of the hair sneaks down around the hook and gets underneath. It's all up there on top where it needs to be. Okay, we'll bring that thread right up behind the back of the wing. Now, a lot of fly tyers try to stand up the complete wing in one fell swoop by wrapping a big ball of thread right there. And they're more or less successful, but usually end up with wings that are tilted forward. Instead, I'm going to break this into several pieces, and I'm going to start at the back of the wing, taking about 1/3 of the clump and taking a loop through that. Then one more, taking about another 1/3 until I'm down to my last 1/3. Okay, now going into my last 1/3, this is where I wrap the ball of thread in front. This ball of thread is often called a thread dam. Whatever you call it, it's the final step in making those wings stand up. Now they're going to stay there forever. This fly is going to be a fan wing fly similar to a comparadun. Now folks normally fan their wings out, but I'm going to wait a little bit. In fact, I'm going to do something that you may not have seen before. I'm going to take a turn loose, but all the way around that, like I was going to make my first turn in making a parachute post, thereby ending up behind in the body area. Now I'm going to take some dubbing wax and apply it, but let's talk about this dubbing wax for a second. I see a lot of people make mistakes with their dubbing wax in that they turn it up way, way, way too tall. The thread cuts it and makes just gobs of a mess all over the dubbing. I'm going to crank this back down. You want this just to barely stick up over the lip of the tube. No matter whose wax you use, that's kind of an important thing. But let's get some wax on the thread. And we'll take some soft dub from Rocky Mountain Dubbing and just kind of dust it along the thread. And it just puts a nice even application of dubbing on our thread, and of course eventually on our hook. And we'll go right back to the back end now and start working our way forward, applying a dub body, essentially making a comparadun type fly. Wrap some dubbing in front as well. Make sure that the front turns are fairly even in size to the back turns. In fact, I have found that sometimes it's a good idea to crisscross under those wings And I'm starting to run out of dubbing, so I'll just put a little bit more wax on and put some more on the thread so that we can finish off the front part of that fly. Again, just using the touch dubbing technique.
You can see how the way this fly is designed. We got a floatability and the high wing profile of a comparadun with the floatability of the CDC for the tail.
Well,
it also absorbs air bubbles and attracts the fish.
Well, that's awesome. And just as a word of information to those of you viewing, think for a moment how you could change this fly and turn it into a caddis. I think some of you are familiar with the X-caddis. Well, it'd be real easy to change this into a CDC kind of an X-caddis just by the way you position the wings. But enough of that. I've been talking along here. Now let's get back to our wings. They're still kind of pulled together. This is the time to fan your comparadun wings out, not when you're trying to put on the dubbing. They'll fan out a lot nicer and stay that 180 degrees across. Now I'm going to take this out of the vise, turn it towards you, and you can kind of see how that's all fanned across. Neat looking fly, isn't it? Put a number 8 hook in the vise, and again this is tight in this size so that you can see better, but you'll probably want to adjust the sizes more appropriate for fishing. I'll just get a base wrap applied. This is a Wulff. Gary developed this fly as a general pattern for the brown drakes on the Big Hole River, and it just kind of developed from there into just an awfully good searching pattern. Now please notice that I've started with white thread. My purpose in using white thread is to hide the anchor wraps that you need to use on the white calf-tail wings. But first, before the white calf-tail wing, we're going to apply a tail. It can be either elk or deer. I've already pre-stacked this hair so that we don't have to spend time going over what we went over on the last fly. Instead, we're just going to measure this hair for length because I want to talk about something just a little bit different than selection of hair and cleaning it out and stacking it. I want to talk about hair flare. I'm going to bind this into place with really, really tight anchor wraps. Now, as I wrap towards the bend of the hook, if I use tight wraps, the hair is going to flare. See how that flares? I don't want that to happen. I want my tail to stay more together. So I'm going to change from the tight anchor wraps to a snug, but not super tight, holding wrap. Notice how the tail stays together rather than flared by just adjusting the kinds of wraps. Trim off that excess, and I'll wrap my thread forward now to the winging position. Now I've already cut off some calf hair. The only thing I want to make with calf hair is that basically a clump of calf hair is 3 levels. You've got these really long fibers, you have an intermediate bunch of fibers, and then you have a lot of fuzzy stuff. It's the first 2 that you want to keep, the third that you want to get rid of. You can almost see that one layer disappear when all we leave behind is the first 2. Now I'm going to go off camera and slide this into a hair stacker and stack that particular clump. But my point there being is that you want to keep 2 levels of hair and get rid of the third. Again, we'll tip the stacker in the direction we want the hair going, and switch hands, and we're going to measure it for length. The length being equal to the length of the hook shank. Set that into position and anchor it in place with that white thread. Just like we did on the last fly, we want to come in from the opposite side and make our cut with the hair pulled back at about a 45-degree angle. Notice also that we're making a cut so it lines up with the trimmed ends of the tail. It just kind of smooths out the body. Let's set all that aside, get it in my waist trawl, and wrap back over that. You see how that all blends together? And though it's two different colors and types of hair, it blends into a smooth underbody. Just like on the last fly, this is the pull point, this place right in the center of the fly. We're going to take a loop around, come back to the center, the pull point. All that does is keep all the hair up on top of the hook where it needs to be, and there's a wild one right there, and a pair of scissors changes its attitude and it's gone. Now we'll just wrap right back, wrap a thread dam in front to form our divided wings. I just want to stand those up a little bit. We could stand them up like we did on the last fly, the dun, but we'll use a slightly different technique on this fly. We'll just spread those apart and figure eight between the two clumps of hair. That just kind of divides them. Now we're going to stand up and post each individual wing section. Notice how that white thread just kind of disappears into the white calf tail. Makes it look a lot nicer than if you had used the color I'm going to end up with, which is brown. Just makes it look like that white calf tail wing is kind of magically divided. Now I'm going to stand those up at the attitude that I want them to be and crisscross between them to pull them into that position. Now I'm going to take one turn of thread in front, pull that out to length and switch to another bobbin, this time holding brown. Just kind of bind that into position, get a good wrap, and then I'll trim off my excess brown and remove the white at the same time. Again, we're back to dubbing wax. And I misplaced mine. Here it is. And remember, don't get that wax wound up too far, or it's going to cut and get greasy on your thread, lump up and so forth. If you do get a place like right here, I've got a lump, you can just come in there with your finger and kind of knock it out and get it out of there. That way you won't have a big mess. Now we're going to use some hare's ear dubbing. And Paul has kindly supplied me with some that is basically guard hair free, and I really prefer that for tying dry flies, is the guard hair free hare's ear. That makes for an awfully nice fly. And we'll talk about as I dub this body, I'm going to dub this Wulff style. Now if you're a person that likes to have a heavily hackled fly, that's all you need to do. If you like a very sparsely hackled fly, I'll need a little bit more of that. But anyway, if you like a very sparsely hackled fly, then I recommend placing some dubbing under the hackle before you wrap the hackles. But I'm going to make this a standard Wulff tie, fairly heavily hackled, so we will only put dubbing back in the body area, leaving the area for the hackle undubbed. But it's kind of an optional thing, whichever way you want to go, which way you like your flies to be. Now notice we got some fuzzies sticking out here. I'm going to make those fuzzies go away with my scissors. All right, now we're ready to put on our hackle. And I've already selected 2 saddle hackles. And notice that I've already removed the fibers from the stem there for a section. And I have them so that they're opposing each other. So if you're of the school that the hackle needs to be pointing forward, one of them's correct. And if you're of the school that one of them needs to be facing backward, then that one's correct. So one of the hackles is correct no matter which way you look at the situation. Now notice that I leave my thread at the back. We're going to use the rotary function of this Dan vise to wrap the hackle and the thread together, but the thread, you'll notice as I put the two together, the thread is towards the front, the hackle's towards the back. Whenever you do a rotary function with a rotary vise, you always go from front to back, or front to back of course, and the thread leads the process. See how easy that is to hackle that fly? Just by wrapping them all together using the rotary function of the vise. Now I'll just kind of wrap in there, and I'll trim that off in a minute, but for right now we'll place a half hitch using the same tool. We'll follow with a whip finish and trim off the excess. Any half hitch tool works for that, as well as a ballpoint pen. Trim off the hackle. I keep a clothespin handy so that that hackle's ready for the next fly. We'll make sure that our wings are divided fine. Let's take a look at that. How do you like that? Hot looking little fly, isn't it?
Thanks for those tying tips, Al. It's always difficult tying with hair, and those tips will really help. This next fly that I'm going to do is a Halo Mayfly Emerger. Everybody needs a good emerger for a mayfly in their fly box, and this is really a good one. Okay, I'm going to start a base wrap of thread on a size 8 hook with some olive thread. I'm going to tie an olive Halo Mayfly Emerger, but you're going to want to tie this in the color of mayfly that you want to simulate. The very first thing I'm going to do is take some clear antron and tie in a tag. This will be a hot spot of color to attract the fly, or excuse me, to attract the fish. Once I get that in, I'm going to wrap it down around the bend 3 or 4 turns and then come back, forming just a little tag.
So that's on bare hook, is that right, Paul?
Yes, it is. Yep, I haven't brought the thread down. I don't want to discolor that clear antron. Okay, now with my thread right above the barb, I'm going to tie in a tail. The tail on this fly is going to be some marabou fiber. I want just a sparse tail, so I'll just pull some marabou fibers from the plume, measure them about the shank of the hook, and tie them in right in front of that tag, and trim away the excess. The body is going to be dubbed. What I'm going to use for the dubbing on this is some antron fiber, but you can also use seal's fur. What you want is something that's really translucent. The sparkle of this antron will really make this fly stand out.
Okay, when you say seal's fur, you could use something like synthetic seal X or something like that too?
Absolutely. In fact, that's even preferable because it's easy to get a hold of. Okay, when I dub this, I'm going to dub the abdomen of the fly, and I'm going to stop just a little bit past the halfway.
Closer to the eye than to the point.
Right,
Okay.
Yep. Keeping a nice thin little body. Okay, the next material that I use is something a little bit different. It's packing foam. This becomes the wing of the fly, the emerging wing. When a fly is in its emergent state, it's really susceptible to being eaten by a trout. It can't escape. So as the fly emerges, I think the fish really key in on that. It becomes their favorite meal. What I've done is I've crisscrossed and I've wrapped this fly in. You can see how I've tied it in. And the next thing I'm going to do is fold the sides in and tie it down. It adds a little bit more bulk to the wing, and it makes a little short emerging wing. Okay, after that's tied in and I trim off the ends, now I'm ready to dub the thorax of the fly. Okay, I'm going to use the same dubbing for the thorax. I'll pull a little bit of dubbing out and twist that onto my thread. I want the thorax to be a little bit thicker than the abdomen. So I'll figure 8 through the wing and build up a little bit thicker thorax on there.
Boy, Paul, that looks like a really great thing to use the double magic you showed us a little earlier for that thorax too. I've been kind of thinking about that a lot since you mentioned it.
Yeah, that would be great. A little peacock body with the double magic on that would make this a really attractive fly. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some orange deer hair. I've previously cut and now I've stacked some orange deer hair that I'm going to tie in as a spike sticking out over the front of the fly. I want it to flare a little bit, trim off the butt, and now I want to elevate that so it actually sticks up.
Sticks up but slightly forward, is that the way it is?
Right, out over the eye in that attitude right there. The purpose of this, when a mayfly emerges, it pumps blood to its wings. And when it pumps the blood, it gives that orange glow to the fly and it becomes a triggering mechanism for the trout.
Well, that's interesting.
Now I'll take my whip finisher and whip finish underneath the spike of hair. And the fly is complete. This next fly was discovered quite by accident. Gary had a fly in his book, Trout Flies Proven Pattern, called the Marabou Worm. One of Gary's friends put a bead head on this to add weight to it, and then started reporting fantastic catches of fish. Well, what they did when they went underwater is found out with the foam on the tail, the bead on the head, that the fly actually tumbled in the water, attracting the fish. Well, Gary came to me and asked me to come up with a way to put foam on the tail and do it rather quickly, and I was able to do that. Let me show you how I tie this fly. The first thing I'm going to do is take a piece of Edgewater foam and insert a bodkin into the foam, making a hole. You can see in my vise I've got a hook with a bead on it, and I'll attach my tying thread and wrap down the shank of the hook. Get rid of that excess there. Now, because I don't want that bead to slide, I'm going to make several wraps right behind the bead to keep it in place. Okay, then I leave my tying thread right at the back of the fly. I'm going to take a piece of marabou, and with this marabou I'm going to strip off, leaving a bare shank. I have the bare stem here, and I'm going to insert the stem right into that piece of foam. Then I'm going to load that foam right up onto the marabou in that manner. Okay, I'm going to measure 1 shank length, transfer hands, and that's exactly where I'll put the foam. And I measure 1 more shank length, and that's where I tie the fly in. Right above the barb, I'm going to tie that down with a couple of real snug wraps. I'll pull the marabou down, twist it with the thread, and wrap the body. I'll tie off that stem of marabou and whip finish. The last thing I have to do is to secure that piece of foam on the back. Now what I like to do is push that against my finger, and I'll take some Zap-A-Gap and drop it right in the hole, and when that's dry, the fly is complete.
Hi, I'm Shar Stimson, and I'm some of the help that Al and Paul talked about earlier in the workshop. I'm going to be tying the deer hair woolly today, and I've already got a size 10 hook in the vise.
See, you already put a grizzly hackle on that as well, Shar.
Yep, I have. It's a dry-fly quality hackle.
Okay, well this is a spun hair fly, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Gary ties it as a terrestrial. It's a real buggy looking thing. It doesn't look like much of anything, but it looks like it represents a whole lot of different things.
Yeah, some people think it represents a caterpillar.
What are you doing there?
I'm cleaning the fluff.
Oh, so the
out
underbird
of the,
stuff out. Okay,
right.
sure.
Yeah, so this will spin better, and we want to pull out these. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and trim. Okay, we're ready to tie in, and kind of lay that over the top of the hook.
You kind of squirm it down around the hook too.
Right, yeah, it makes it a lot easier to
Oh, I can see that.
tie in. Okay, I'm going to take 3 loose wraps, and then just let go, and it flares.
Yeah, if you don't do the 3 loose wraps, if you do 2, part of it's going to fall off the hook.
It'll fly.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to take my bodkin. We get some of this, it gets hooked around the back, underneath the gap. Get that all cleared out.
And here's a clump of hair that's all ready to go. I'll just hand it to you.
Okay, I've got a,
Oh, excuse me.
it's okay. Okay,
Oh,
for
that's
the
right, you gotta
first
work-
clump, I'm going to wrap to the back, so I cover up that thread.
Right.
Kind of move your thread back and forth so that you don't tie down some of those hairs. Okay, now I'm going to take my brassy. I'm going to hold on to the back here where I've got the hackle tied in so I don't push it over the bend of the hook. Just kind of pack this back. And I'm ready for the second.
Here you go.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and trim this off just like we did the last one. And for the second clump, I'm going to lay it in sideways so that I don't tie down any of these previous hairs.
Laying it at an angle.
At an angle, Okay, we do the 3 wraps again. Loosely pull, let it flare, and then just kind of do the same.
Well, and to complete the fly, you're going to probably put about 3 or maybe 4 more clumps of hair on.
Right.
Now, in the interest of time, I suggest that you go to the one we already have prepared for trimming and just half hitch that one off, and we'll switch over to that.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do a half hitch, pull this one out.
All right. And here you go, one ready to go as far as trimming it. Now you do most of the trimming in the vise.
Yeah,
and
I do.
And then you get to the last little bit, you kind of finish off, huh?
Yeah.
I see you change to curved scissors as well.
Yeah, it makes it easier for me to get that rounded cigar shape.
Oh, I can see that. It really is slick.
Yeah, it trims it really nice.
I just think even yet today, after all the years of trimming hair, I think it's magical the way that gob of stuff can turn into something that looks so nice.
It is. It still amazes me.
Yep, there it is. You're just about to finish that little fellow up.
Okay, we get back here to the critical point where I don't want to trim off that hackle because it's impossible to tie a new one in on this fly.
Pretty tough. I've done it, and the only way I know to do it is to kind of cheat a little bit, and you take and zap a gap one into place and come back a half an hour later and
That would work.
It works, but it's not exactly the cleanest way to do things.
Okay, now I just need to get these last little long ones out of the way. Some of them can be really stubborn.
You know, and you and I were talking a little bit off camera too, that as this fly is tied in smaller sizes, we're doing like a number 10 here. If you were to do a 14 or a 16, rather than spin the hair around the hook, you're going to want to flare it in place with the hair on top of the hook so that you don't cover up too much of your hook gap.
Right. Yeah, because it can fill in there really quick.
Oh yes, but on this size of a fly, you want to spin it all the way around.
Right.
You want to have that full effect, and you've got plenty of gap to play with.
All right, I think that's trimmed pretty well.
Yeah, that's looking really good. You're gonna reattach a lighter weight thread than you were using before, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, and the reason for that is I don't want to really build the head up too fast, and the other thread really does.
Another thing to comment on too, on your hackle, it's sized so it's small for the hook size because you're wrapping it around such a fat body that it increases the length of the barb. So,
right.
And as an example, this is a 10 hook and you're using a 12 hackle.
That's correct. Okay.
Oh, that's really starting to look good.
I'm going to take 3 wraps there and 1 more wrap around the head. We'll tie off.
Uh-huh.
Trim it.
Oh, I think that looks great. How do you like that half hitch tool to finish off your fly?
I love it.
It really is. It's another way of doing it over the regular whip finish tool, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
What an awesome looking bug.
Yeah, it's a great fly.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Beatty, and I'm the 3rd string tyer today. And I'm going to be doing a fly that I think is a very practical fly. It's called the Improved buzzball. And this fly is used to imitate a clump of midges. We fish a lot of tailwaters around here, and midges seem to be the real supply of food every day for fish. So this is a very practical fly and a very easy fly to tie. Although I'm placing a size 10 hook in the vise so that you can better see me tie this fly, normally would tie and fish it in a size 14 or 16, because as Gary has observed, that tends to do a better job pulling the fish out of their feeding lane to take this clump of midges. I'm tying with gray thread, unithread, and I'm just putting a base wrap in. It's really not too significant where we start this base wrap. We just want to have a nice base wrap here to put our hackle over. And this is basically a fly made with hackle for the body. So we have a grizzly, we have a dun, and we have a grizzly dyed orange. And we'll just tie these in right here at the back, the beginning of the shank. And I'm going to tie them a little longer than normal so that it kind of evens out my body, so it's all the same all the way down. And we'll just trim off the excess here. Maybe we'll trim off the excess. Okay. And now you want to take the first two, which would be the dun and the grizzly dyed orange, and we'll just tie those as the body material all the way down the shank of the hook. And we want each wrap to follow the previous one as closely as we can, and just keep tying, wrapping around and around, being sure not to lose hold of one of them. Really doesn't matter what size these first two hackles are, because we will trim them anyway. So it's a good place just to use whatever you have on hand that you don't normally use. This being a size 10, we'll probably trim this hackle about to a size 16. Now I'm just going to take a little whip finish over here just to be sure that we don't lose this for the first part, and trim off the excess. Now we want to trim this hackle so that it's just about halfway down the fly towards the point of the hook. And we'll do that all the way around. So we'll just use our rotary function here, keep our scissors kind of stable, and turn and clip. That way we should get a fairly even job of clipping the body. We have a few still sticking up, and we'll just kind of clean it up now. And that gives us the body of this fly. Isn't that kind of neat looking with that grizzly dyed orange and the dun? Now the final thing we're going to do here is just to wrap this grizzly hackle in through there, and we're going to leave it's sized properly, so we're going to just leave it on like this and then tie it off, trim the excess. And this is the original buzzball, and just to this point, and now we're going to do the improved buzzball. We take a piece of this clear antron, and we're just going to tie it on like this and fold it over to form a wing. There, we got him. we might as well just put our finish on the fly right now. And we want this wing just to be halfway down the body, so we can just trim it. And that's going to be lunch for our midge-eating fish in the tailwaters.
Get this number 8 hook in the vise. That'll make a pattern big enough that we can see what we're doing. And this is called the Easy to See Caddis. Now this is something new for me. I've never seen this fly, I've never tied it, I've never fished it. I'm going strictly on faith that if Gary says it's good, it's good. And Paul is going to explain to me how to get through this. Now, the only thing I know is that I'm starting out with some green, olive green thread, and I'm going to be prompted by Paul everything I have to do from this point forward. So not only am I going to be learning, but so are you. So to start, I'm going to start about 1/3 back from the eye of the hook and apply a base wrap of tying thread. Okay, when I reach the bend of the hook, I'll return about halfway to my starting point, leaving the thread hanging just in front of the point of the hook. Now, Paul, this is where you come into the picture, so I put my base wrap on. Now what happens?
Okay, the first thing I want you to do, Al, is take your dubbing, and I want you to dub half the hook shank.
That's the back half?
Right, the back half of the hook shank. Just put some regular dubbing on that.
Okay, let me get some dubbing wax and put it, so I don't need to put on a whole heck of a lot. And we're using fine and dry, and that's kind of a long fibered sort of dubbing, and we're just going to nurse out a few fibers here. And apply it right to our waxed thread.
Remember, this is just a standard caddis fly, Al, so just make it a regular caddis body.
Okay, well, this is looking, and we'll stop right there. We're kind of in the middle of the body area, if you will.
The next thing you want to do is take some dark elk hair, regular elk hair.
That's like this stuff that's in the bag here that I probably should have taken out before we started, but anyway, here it is. Yep. This stuff here.
Right, and just cut a small piece for a wing.
Okay, we can do that. Let me slip it into a stacker. All right, that's in the stacker.
Okay, tie that right in front of the body and let it extend just a little bit past the bend, just a regular caddis wing.
Oh, okay. Now this is a Trude style sort of a caddis wing is what we're talking about, huh?
Right, just downwing caddis.
It just comes right to the end of the hook. All right, well, we'll give that a try. That sounds interesting. All right, now that cinches into place. And you just sort of let it flare, or do you try to bring the flare under control?
Yeah, a controlled flare. Controlled flare. You don't want it to spread out too much.
Okay.
Okay, the next thing you want to cut the tips right completely off.
All right, let's get this, the wild ones that don't want to cooperate out of the way. Now I'm just going to kind of cover wrap over those, and I assume now that we're going to go up here and put on some more dubbing.
More dubbing, right. You're going to dub up to about 4/5 of the way up the hook shank. Leave some room for another wing and a hackle up front.
Oh, okay. Well, so far it doesn't sound too terribly difficult. Let's get a little bit more of this fine and dry, and I'll just pull a bit out. And we'll just slip it up here and we'll put it into place. I'll just kind of wrap up and over and kind of bring that wing slightly under control with some of my body material. So now we're going to do a Trude wing, and we're going to do that.
Right, we'll be with the yellow calf tail.
Boy, that is a bright yellow. You ought to be able to see that. That's probably why he calls it easy to see, huh?
Exactly right. As we get older, sometimes our eyesight fades a little bit, and we need a little bit of extra help on the water.
Boy, no
and that's
kidding.
what this caddis is for.
Okay, well, I've got some in the stacker, and let me go ahead. I appreciate you getting these materials together for me. It's, well, at least the right amount has been selected so that I can get that done. Now, where does this wing extend past this one,
Right,
the
it's gonna be
original?
right to the end of the other wing.
So the
right,
top
we'll
wing
cover it.
comes even with the underwing.
Right.
Now that I've got that length, let me do a little trim here. Let me just move off camera for a moment to trim that off.
And don't forget to do that little trick of winding underneath the wing. to
Oh yeah,
lock
thanks
it in place.
for reminding me. I have a slightly different way of doing that, and I'll share with you just how I do that. I go from the pull point, which is right in the middle of the head area, and bring it back. And I have to get it kind of divide and get that hair from the other wing out of the way. And then you're pulling at a lower angle. You can pull that wing straight up if you wanted to, but we're just going to wrap it into place. Now let me get these hackles that you've already pre-selected for me, one brown and one grizzly. And I've got them tied so they're opposing each other, and I got strip fibers right here. So I'll just go ahead and tie them in. And wrap to the band. Oh, the stems are just a little bit too long. I better trim those off. All right, that's looking good.
And it's just a standard hackle, Al. It's just a regular hackle size for that size fly.
You bet. Okay, thread in front of the hackles, the two hackles pulled together. Use the rotating function of the vise to place the hackle. Okay, when we get right up to the eye of the hook, we're going to just take another turn of hackle. Was just a little bit short where I stopped. And I'll pull that hackle back out of the way and make a couple of turns just to get ready for my half hitch whip finish. And I'll take Paul's tool, he had it laying here handy, the half hitch tool, and we'll use it for a half hitch as well as a whip finish.
There you go, Al. You just finished your first easy to see caddis.
Well, I can sure see why it's easy to see. That top wing is just, wow, it's just it's fluorescent in the first place. And look at that. Let me kind of fuzz the wing up a little bit. You've got the flotation from the caddis underneath, good looking body area, and standard grizzly brown mix hackle. Really a buggy looking fly.
When we were planning this video, I was very excited to see this next fly. It's called the Teardrop Nymph, and it's a fly that is designed for fishing deep nymphing in fast-running water, and I find that to be a very, very difficult thing to do. I want you to take a look at this hook. It's a size 12, and it's a specially designed hook that you can get from the book mailer that Gary has. And it has the weight already put on it in a teardrop shape up here. If you don't have access to those hooks, you could pinch on some split shot, or there's some of that lead tape that you can shape and put on here. But we happen to have access to this great hook, so that's what we're going to use. I'm going to start out with just some tan colored thread, and we'll just put it right on here on the back. Now, I haven't tied this fly before, but I want to learn how to tie it because I'm excited to fish it on the Gunnison, where we have to do a lot of deep water nymphing, and I have to admit that that is one thing I really struggle with. A couple weekends ago, I had so much weight on my line, I could hardly have the strength to move it, so I'm anxious to try this fly on the Gunnison River. Now, it starts out with a very sparse marabou tail. So I've just got some of this tannish looking marabou here, and we're going to pull it off and tie a little bit on here so it's just a little bit longer maybe than the length of the shank of the hook. Measure it and tie it down, and just take a few wraps here to secure it. This is a very quick fly, I think, to tie, so I'm anxious to see if it goes together as easily as it looks like. Now I've got, this is Uniglow body material. It's kind of a fluorescent stuff, And we'll just have to have a little tiny piece of this because, as you can see, we don't have much space here for our body. So I'm going to attach some of this with a few wraps of my thread, and now I'm going to, it's going to take me, I think, about 2 or 3 wraps of this to form the body, and that should do it. There we go, 3, and I'm right up against that lead. We'll tie it off, clip off the excess. Now, one of the problems in tying this is you have all this steep lead here, and you have to figure out how to get your dubbing around that and secure it. So I'm going to just take some of this Aquaflex, any flexible head cement would probably do, and I'll use my bodkin, and I'm just going to drop a little on here. So I make kind of a tacky area, and that's going to hold my dubbing so it won't slip off. We'll use the touch method of dubbing. We'll just get our wax and stroke a little wax here on the thread, and use some of this tan Antron dubbing that Paul has provided for us, and just stroke it on. Now, I'm not even going to twist this because I want this to look kind of buggy here. So we're just going to start wrapping around. I'm going to crisscross. This is kind of magic. I didn't know if this was going to work there for a minute. Look at that. That buggy little mess there. And I suppose if we've got it a little too fuzzy, we could just trim some of that off. And now all I have to do is whip finish. And I've got a cute little nymph that'll go right down to the bottom of the water, right where the fish are feeding and looking for food. And I'm going to take this out in a couple weekends and try it on the Gunnison.
I'm really excited to do this next fly. It's the diving blue wing olive egg layer. What Gary discovered when he was doing the scuba diving is that a blue wing olive does not lay on the water and drop its eggs like most mayflies. What a blue wing olive does when it wants to deposit eggs, it crawls down to the bottom of the river and deposits the eggs. That required a brand new fly. One of the things that Gary discovered in a picture that I've seen of an olive that's on the bottom is the males actually go down to the bottom with the females, and that gives them more of a chance of surviving long enough to lay their eggs. So we need a brand new fly, and this is the fly that I'm going to tie in this video. First thing I'm going to do, and I've got a large hook. I've got a number 10 in the vise, and it's going to look like a blue wing olive on steroids, but actually this is just so you can see it. You want to tie this fly the same size as the blue wing olive done. I'm going to lay down a base wrap of olive thread and tie in a tail. I'm going to use some spade hackle, some dark dun spade hackle for the tail. And I want that to be the length of the shank. The next thing I'm going to do is take some lead, and I'm going to cut a small piece and tie it right underneath the thorax to provide a little extra weight to get this fly down. Okay, now when you tie this fly, you're going to want to cover that with some lacquer so it doesn't disfigure or discolor the fly. Okay, the next step is to take some dubbing, and I've got a superfine blue wing olive dubbing, and I'm going to dub the abdomen and the thorax I want to keep this fly fairly sparse and taper the body as I go towards the front. When I do get to the front, then I'm going to tie in a wing of clear antron. I've got my clear antron here, and I'm going to tie in a wing right on top of the hook, fold it over, and tie it down. I want that to be extended into about a 45-degree angle, so I'm going to take some thread wraps behind the wing in order to elevate that, and then I'll trim away the excess. The next thing I'm going to do is turn the fly upside down and add some more dun hackle as a beard, and this gives the impression of legs for the fly. I'll tie that in right in front of the eye and trim off the excess. The last thing I do is take a little bit more dubbing just to make the fly look finished. I'll dub off right on my tie down spot right in front of the wing and then whip finish. Now I have a completed diving bluing olive egg layer.
Okay, I've just placed a number 8, 3X long, streamer type hook in the vise. 9672 mustad or 700 Dyricki, something equivalent to that. The plain Jane is a muddler type of a really plain Jane sort of a streamer. So none of the glitzy flashy stuff that we normally see is going to be put on this fly. I'm going to start by attaching my thread about 1/3 behind the point of the eye of the hook. Okay, until we get back to the end of the bend. And then I'm going to come back almost to my starting point. Not quite, because Marabou has a way of making your whole fly kind of creep forward. Now this tail has a very short trimmed Marabou tail. I'm just going to get a clump of Marabou, cut off the excess, and tie it into place. One of the reasons that I cut it off is that, again, it tends to creep forward and can sure make your fly get shorter or longer, whichever way you want to look at it, as you work your materials onto the hook. Now this is trimmed just flat even, just like that. It kind of makes a stubbed off tail like a fish would normally have. The body is made out of just plain cream colored wool. We'll tie that into place, wrap back to where the tail starts and then back to our starting point, and just wrap a body of cream. Now this is a plain Jane, so it doesn't need to have a rib or anything flashy on it. It's for those drab old days when you just want a plain ordinary looking sort of a fly. And we'll just bind that off right there and trim off the excess. Now the wing is a very sparse Marabou, same color as the tail. In this case it's brown, but I want it to be very, very sparse. So I just strip a few fibers off the stem of the Marabou itself. Get those trimmed out and attach them right at the very start of the body area. Now it's a very, very sparse wing. Now I'm going to have to select some deer hair for the collar and the head. Before I select that deer hair, notice this Marabou goes wild. Well, a little bit of saliva on my fingers. Process called goobering, at least that's what Marv Nolte calls it. Gets that material back out of the way. Now I've got some deer hair here, and we're going to lay this down just out of sight of the camera and cut a piece off and put it into our hair stacker and stack it. That first hair is going to be the collar. We'll just slip that out of the hair stacker and do the collar. Now, it's a half collar on this fly, just across the top. So I'm going to kind of measure it for length and then trim it for that length and set it right in on top. Loose turns and then flare it in position, keeping under tension as I come through those base ends, getting into the bare area of the hook right at the very front part. See, that gives us a collar, if you will, across the top. Now from this point on, rather than flaring the hair, I'm going to trim off another piece. I'm going to trim that hair, or spin that hair. And may have to do it in a clump or two. We'll see how this all turns out. I'm just cleaning out some of the underfur at this point. Lay it in at an angle and just kind of snug up a little bit. 2 more turns just to hold it in place, and let's trim the excess. Making certain that we don't trim off the excess that includes the collar of our fly. And we'll just go ahead and put it under pressure and make a little trim, or spin. By George, I think I need to have just a little bit more in there. I'll push that back. However, Gary emphasizes that this fly should have a fairly small head. Now, one more spin here. I'm going to make that hair slightly longer, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Third wrap, trim off the excess. Make the spin. Spins into place. Now the reason it's longer is it's easier to grab this longer hair and pull it back so I can get my half hitch, whip finish, and all that type of stuff done right at the front of the fly. Set that aside, or pull that back, and get all the stray hair off of my half hitch tool and half hitch it, followed up with a whip finish, and we got the fly ready to trim. Trimming a fly. Well, a lot of folks have trouble trimming a fly, and we're going to make this an extra small head per Gary's recipe. So let's start with the bottom of the fly by just trimming it flat. I'll just take care of that whole thing, kind of brings everything up even with the collar. Now we'll just lay our scissors at about an angle that would give us a triangular shaped head and start trimming. The rotary vise really makes this function much, much simpler. All right, now you notice this stuff that's left right here. Several things you can do with it. If you got really sharp scissors and you're feeling adventuresome and want to play around with your collar, you can go right in here and start cutting and trying to get it without getting the collar. Or you can take another approach to it by laying your scissors in and allowing the blades to push your collar back and making a trim. Move the vise again, push the collar back and making a trim. Collar back one more time and making a trim. One more time and making a trim. And that plain Jane still has a little bit of a ridge here, so let's just go ahead and knock that down. Round the front out just a little bit, and you got a plain Jane streamer. Very effective fly. It's really good for those drab days.
The last fly in this workshop is called a Diving Water Boatman. The interesting thing about this fly is the fact that I use this fly a lot when I fish still water. What Gary has determined on this fly, or the principles of this fly, show that the Water Boatman, when it comes up for a gulp of air and it dives back down into the water, it definitely dives head first. So what we're going to do to combat this is make sure that the back is spun deer hair and the front of it's weighted so it has the correct attitude when it dives back down into the water. Let me show you how this fly goes together. I'm going to take a heavy thread because I need to do some spinning here, and I'm going to wrap it on the hook shank and trim off the excess. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is take some lead. Take a piece of lead and wrap it around the front part of the hook shank. Now this will allow the fly to sink head first.
Okay, and then the buoyancy of the deer hair on the back is going to give it the attitude that you need as it goes back down with the bubble of
Yep,
air.
that's exactly right.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, I'm going to use a shell back on this, on a Water Boatman, and I'm going to use some pheasant fibers. And I want enough pheasant fibers at least to fill up the gap of the hook. And I'll tie those right on the back and let them stick out until the very end of the fly.
You don't have a tail, you're just going to have a spun back part of the body.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And this will be the shell back that I'll pull over after I'm finished.
All right.
Okay. The back part, the back 1/3 is going to be deer hair. I'll trim that off and clean it out. Now rather than spin this hair, I'm going to take a chunk of it and I'm going to splay it around the hook, take a couple of wraps and just flare it right into place. And that'll cover about 1/3 of the hook shank. And now I'll just trim that down so it's in a round shape.
I can't quite see. Oh, I see. Okay, and then you're going to pull the back up over the top of that spun hair.
Right. After I finish the front of the fly, then I'll pull it over the top.
Oh, so the back goes over the whole body.
Right.
Okay, I got you. Do you have legs on this fly?
Yeah, the leg's going to be, I'm going to use part of this pheasant to depict the legs. In fact, that's the very next thing I'll do. As soon as I get the last fibers out of the way, I'm going to pull one leg or one pheasant fiber off each side of this fly and pull it forward.
Okay.
One on this side, and I'll tie it down. And one on this side, and tie it down. Then I'll pull them back so it has them kicker legs like a Water Boatman has.
Oh, that's an interesting way of putting them on.
Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is take some gold antron, and I'm just going to dub this right onto the body. And this antron doesn't have to be gold, it can be a brown or whatever color the Water Boatman is. But I found gold is a really good color for this fly. And I'll wrap up the front 2/3 of the hook shank with gold antron. And once again, the gold antron's going to collect the air bubbles and make this fly look alive.
So you're having to build that up a bit, Paul, so that you can match the size that you made out of the spun hair.
Right. It's going to be the same thickness as the deer hair in the back, and make it look like it's the same size all the way down the hook shank.
Okay.
And then I'll taper it off into the front.
This is sure an interesting bug.
Yep. Okay, then the next thing that I do is that I'll take this wing case and pull it all the way forward and tie that down. That becomes the shell back. Trim off the front and whip finish, making a rather large head on this fly.
Again, to kind of match the rest of the body and everything, huh?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, and then before I put it to rest, I'll trim off a few fibers of the deer hair body that I don't like. And cut the legs to size.
About how long should those legs be?
Probably 3/4 to the shank length to 3/4 of the shank length.
Okay.
Probably no longer than that.
Pretty much the length of the body of the fly, give or take a bit.
Right.
Okay.
Then I want to add some head cement, not only to just the front of the fly, but also to the wing case, just to make that a little bit stronger.
Good. I'll tell you, Paul, that Water Boatman really turned me on. There's some ponds right near Delta here where I live that is going to be an awesome pattern. I really want to thank you and Shar for coming over, spending your time to come and share Gary's flies with us.
Well, thanks, Al. Shar and I really enjoyed it. One of the things Al and I would like to do is dedicate this video to the most innovative fly tyer or fly designer we've ever met, Gary LaFontaine.
I'd like to personally thank Gary. I've known him for years, and I really appreciate the fact that he gave us permission to bring these flies to you. I'd also like to thank my wife and Shar, the third team as they call themselves, for coming and helping us as well. Now all of you take these patterns, simple though they are, but terribly effective, go to your vise and enjoy them on the river.